Jimmy Kimmel Live. Suspended. Free Speech, Power and Consequences. Part 1. The Spark. It started with a monologue. On a night that seemed like any other on Jimmy Kimmel Live, Jimmy leaned into the headlines. Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist, murdered at a public event. The nation was bleeding with grief. Tension crackled through cable news. And Kimmel turned to what he saw as hypocrisy. "We hit some new lows over the weekend," Kimmel said, his voice both sharp and weary. With the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. Then came the jab at Donald Trump's response. "This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he calls a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish." That line, funny to some, cruel to others, was the kindling to a wildfire. Within hours, conservative media outlets pounced. Insensitivity, weaponizing tragedy, political point scoring. Critics claimed Kimmel had jumped the gun. Authorities hadn't yet confirmed the political ideology of Kirk's accused killer, Tyler Robinson. Some reports said Robinson's family and texts pointed in the opposite direction politically. Kimmel's remark that Robinson was being mischaracterized by MAGA land was seen by many as presumptive and inflammatory. Meanwhile, the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, who had already been making noise about media accountability, called the comments misleading. "This appears to mislead the public about significant facts," he said in an interview with CNBC. He warned of regulatory consequences. Broadcast licenses, especially for local affiliates, hinge on serving the public interest, he said. PBS +3, CNBC +3, Al Jazeera +3. The pressure on ABC came fast. Nexstar Media Group, which owns many local ABC stations, said they would no longer air Jimmy Kimmel Live in their markets. They called the remarks offensive and insensitive at a critical time in our national political discourse. ABC quickly followed, announcing the show would be preempted indefinitely. That means no reruns, no new episodes, for now. Al Jazeera +2, PBS +2. Some supported this decision. They said corporations and broadcasters have responsibilities, not just to entertain, but to avoid stoking division, especially when the nation mourns. Others cried censorship. That Jimmy Kimmel was being punished for speaking truth as he saw it, for calling out hypocrisy, for challenging power. But almost nobody was surprised. In recent years, late-night comedy has become less about jokes and more about commentary. The line between satire and politics has blurred. And with polarization running hot, the consequences for stepping over perceived lines have only grown harsher. As the announcement reached viewers, social media exploded. Clips of Kimmel's remarks were shared, dissected, mocked, defended. Free speech hashtags trended. Advertisers railed. Protesters gathered. Disney, which owns ABC, found itself not just managing a show, but managing a firestorm. As Kimmel's talk show stage fell dark, one question split the country. Had he been unfairly silenced? Or had he finally said something that broadcast TV couldn't ignore? And with the FCC peering over every network's shoulder, were we entering a new era where satire must always fear the fallout? Part 2. Who holds the power? Behind the decision to suspend Jimmy Kimmel Live was more than just public outrage. It was about power. Who controls what Americans see on their screens, and who gets to decide when a line has been crossed? Most people assume shows like Kimmel are entirely the product of one network. But in reality, the broadcast system is complicated. ABC, owned by Disney, distributes the show. But the people who actually beam it into living rooms across the country are local affiliates. Station groups like Nexstar and Sinclair. They control dozens of local stations. And each of those stations holds something far more valuable than a comedy show: a broadcast license. That license isn't permanent. Every few years, affiliates have to renew it through the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. The FCC, in turn, judges whether these stations are operating in the public interest. That phrase, vague and powerful, was suddenly the sword hanging over Jimmy Kimmel. When FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr spoke out against Kimmel's remarks, it wasn't just criticism, it was a reminder of leverage. Carr suggested that spreading misinformation about something as grave as a political assassination could fall outside the bounds of serving the public. If that argument stuck, affiliates airing Kimmel might have found their licenses questioned when renewal came around. No affiliate could risk it. Nexstar pulled out almost immediately, announcing they would no longer air Kimmel's show. Other groups quietly followed. Suddenly, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't just a comedian with a microphone. He had become a liability. Inside Disney's executive offices, the calculation was brutal. On one side was free expression, protecting their talent, defending satire, and avoiding the appearance of bowing to political pressure. On the other was reality. Angry affiliates, threatened licenses, and advertisers spooked by the controversy. Sources inside the company leaked that some Disney executives argued the suspension wasn't about speech at all, but about business survival. "We can't afford to lose affiliates," one insider was quoted as saying. "Without them, ABC dies." Disney had been here before, caught between public backlash and political scrutiny. But this was different. This wasn't about a children's film or a theme park decision. This was about live commentary, raw politics, and the sharp edge of tragedy. The power struggle revealed something most viewers never think about. Comedians, anchors, and even network presidents are not the ultimate decision makers. The real power lies in the hands of regulators, affiliate owners, and advertisers, the entities that can cut the cord on a show with a single decision. And in Kimmel's case, all three were aligning. Regulators were watching, affiliates were retreating, advertisers were demanding distance. As Jimmy Kimmel's stage stayed dark, the question grew louder. If affiliates, regulators, and advertisers hold the power, does free speech in broadcast television actually exist? Or is it just borrowed time, waiting for someone to pull the plug? Part 3. The Fallout. When the suspension became official, the reaction was instant, and it was brutal. For years, Jimmy Kimmel had been a late-night fixture, a man who built his career out of irreverence, vulnerability, and pointed satire. But suddenly, the very qualities that made him beloved were being reframed as reckless, irresponsible, even dangerous. Social media lit up in a frenzy. On one side were those who defended him, insisting that late-night comedy had always pushed boundaries. "He's a comedian, not a politician," one fan wrote on X. "If you can't joke about politics in America, what's left?" Others went further, calling the suspension a form of censorship, warning that if comedians could be silenced, anyone could. But the other side was louder and growing. Hashtags like #CancelKimmel and #NotFunnyJimmy trended for days, fueled not only by political opponents but also by everyday viewers who felt his remarks had crossed an unforgivable line. For them, it wasn't about censorship. It was about accountability. Words had power, they argued. And words spoken into a camera at 11:35 p.m. on a national network could ripple far beyond a laugh. The media firestorm only amplified the chaos. Conservative outlets framed the story as proof that Hollywood elites lived detached from reality, mocking tragedy for ratings. Liberal-leaning networks walked a tighter line, criticizing Kimmel's poor judgment but hinting that the suspension was overkill. And in the middle of it all, Jimmy Kimmel stayed silent. Friends close to him leaked that he was furious. Furious at being hung out to dry by Disney. Furious at the affiliates who folded so quickly. Furious at the FCC for stepping into what he saw as a creative space. But he was also shaken. Few comedians ever imagined their words could threaten the business infrastructure of an entire network. Behind closed doors, the late-night community rallied. Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers, and John Oliver all offered private messages of support. But publicly, most remained cautious. No one wanted to end up in the same crosshairs. Meanwhile, Disney executives scrambled to contain the fallout. Advertisers demanded answers. Some pulled spots from Jimmy Kimmel Live, altogether waiting to see if the suspension would hold. Every day the show stayed off the air, ABC lost money, and affiliates grew restless without a proven ratings anchor in the lineup. But money wasn't the only thing at stake. The The controversy had morphed into a national debate over free speech, comedy, and political influence. Was Kimmel being punished for an ill-timed joke, or for daring to touch a subject too raw, too politically explosive for television? In Washington, members of Congress began weighing in. Some Republicans cheered his suspension as overdue. Some Democrats condemned it as a dangerous precedent. Suddenly, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't just a comedian in trouble. He was a symbol, a test case for the limits of speech in America's most powerful medium. As the noise grew louder, one question remained unanswered. When the cameras eventually turned back on, would Jimmy Kimmel be allowed to laugh again? Or had he just witnessed the end of his career in real time? Part 4. The Silence. For 2 weeks, the familiar glow of Jimmy Kimmel Live never appeared on ABC's late-night lineup. In its place were reruns of sitcoms, hastily edited best of clips, and the occasional guest host covering the gap. But the absence was more deafening than any mistake Jimmy had made on air. Every night, fans logged on waiting for news. Was he gone for good? Was the suspension indefinite? Was Disney quietly negotiating his exit? No one seemed to know. In Los Angeles, paparazzi staked out Jimmy's home. Photos showed him walking his dog, head down, baseball cap pulled low. His smile, the one Americans associated with sharp monologues and playful skits, was nowhere to be found. Privately, insiders whispered about tense meetings between Jimmy and Disney executives. He wanted his job back, but they wanted assurances. Assurances that he wouldn't step out of line again. For a comedian who built his brand on irreverence, that was a bitter pill to swallow. Meanwhile, the silence created space for speculation. Tabloids claimed he was in rehab. Others suggested he was lawyering up, preparing to sue ABC for breach of contract. Conspiracy theories popped up on TikTok, alleging the suspension was a cover-up for something bigger. The late-night landscape felt strangely empty without him. Fallon still cracked jokes, Colbert still needled politics, but there was a hole where Kimmel's particular edge used to be. His absence was proof of his influence. Love him or hate him, people noticed when he wasn't there. And through it all, Jimmy Kimmel himself said nothing. No tweets, no interviews, no statements, just silence. But silence has its own power. For some, it was a dignified choice, letting the storm blow over. For others, it was weakness, a sign that the comedian who once thrived on sharp wit and quick comebacks had finally been humbled. Behind the scenes, however, a plan was already forming. Jimmy Kimmel was not finished. The question wasn't whether he would return, it was how, and whether America would still be laughing when he did. Part 5. The Return. When the announcement finally came, it was brief. Jimmy Kimmel Live would return on a Monday night, with Jimmy himself back behind the desk. No long press release, no fanfare, just a schedule listing slipped quietly into ABC's programming guide. But the build-up was anything but quiet. The date circled on calendars. Late-night blogs speculated about his monologue. Would he apologize again? Would he lash out? Would he avoid the controversy altogether and just go straight to jokes? The network tightened security around the studio. Staff were instructed not to leak details. Ticket holders for the live audience signed extra agreements. The return wasn't just another show, it was a test. When the night came, the cameras rolled, and Jimmy walked out to thunderous applause. The audience rose to their feet, cheering as if they had been holding their breath for weeks. He smiled, a little thinner than usual, and waved, taking his place at the desk. For a moment, the silence was electric. Then he leaned forward, hands folded, and broke it with a single line. "Well, did you miss me?" The crowd roared. The monologue that followed was equal parts sharp humor and subtle contrition. He poked fun at himself, joked about being grounded by the network, and even teased the conspiracy theories about his disappearance. But beneath the jokes was a cautious undertone, a sense that this return wasn't quite business as usual. Critics dissected every word the next morning. Some praised him for keeping his edge while acknowledging the storm. Others accused him of sidestepping accountability, claiming he laughed off something serious. But what mattered most was the ratings. And when the numbers came in, they were staggering. Jimmy's return drew the highest audience his show had seen in years. The controversy had, in its own twisted way, revived him. Yet behind the applause and the jokes, one truth lingered. Jimmy Kimmel was back, but on thinner ice than ever before. One wrong move, one poorly timed joke, and the silence might return, this time permanently. Part 6. Legacy in question. The weeks after Jimmy Kimmel's return were a blur of laughter, tension, and uncertainty. Every monologue was replayed, transcribed, and analyzed online. Every guest appearance was scrutinized for hidden meaning. The studio felt more like a courtroom than a stage, with audiences acting as both jury and judge. For his loyal fans, the return was vindication. They argued that Jimmy had weathered the storm with dignity, that his survival proved the resilience of comedy in an age where words can spark outrage in seconds. They shared clips, laughed at his new jokes, and defended him in online skirmishes. For his critics, the comeback was proof of an industry that protected its stars while ignoring the damage they caused. To them, Jimmy was not a survivor but a symbol of privilege. Someone who could say things that would end another career, yet still return to applause. And in the middle of it all was Jimmy himself, a man trying to reclaim normalcy while walking a tightrope with no net. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that he had grown more cautious in meetings, second-guessing punchlines that once flowed freely. The fearless edge that defined him had dulled, replaced by calculation. Yet, as the months stretched on, a strange balance emerged. Viewers tuned in not just for the jokes, but for the tension, the sense that at any moment, the next sentence could tip the scales again. The controversy became part of the show's DNA, woven into its fabric like an unspoken subplot. By the end of the year, Jimmy Kimmel had secured his place in late-night history, but not the way he once imagined. He was no longer just the affable host with sharp wit. He was the man who stood at the crossroads of comedy and consequence, whose every word carried the weight of both laughter and risk. His legacy was no longer defined by the jokes he told, but by the storm he survived. And whether people loved him or loathed him, one truth remained undeniable. Jimmy Kimmel had become more than a late-night host. He was a mirror, reflecting both the fragility and the fury of the times.